Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Rodrigo Olivares-Caminal and I'm a professor in banking and finance law at Queen Mary University of London. And I'm also the director of IGLEF, the Institute for Global Law, Economics and Finance. And I'll be hosting today's event titled How to Reduce Poverty, and the answer being simple. And that's what we are here today for. We have a very experienced guest speaker. He's a very good friend of the house, Gerónimo Frigerio. He's the founding partner of GF Consulting. He's an international policy and law reform expert. He has a very vast experience working on multilateral environments and with policy reform across borders. He has been working in Washington, D.C. and the Washington institutions for many years before incorporating GF Consulting. And he was in this role, in this capacity, he was part of the doing business team. You know that the doing business team or the doing business is a benchmark internationally used by countries, particularly in issues of law reform, because it has the indicators that many countries rely on as to how effective their system is. And also this is something that is used as a catalyst to attract investments. Gerónimo recently published some of the findings of his vast experience in a book published by Penguin in December 2020. The title of the book is the same as today's presentation, which is How to Reduce Poverty, Simple. And I am quite intrigued to find out about Gerónimo's proposal, and that's what we are going to be doing today. The way in which we are going to conduct this, many of you know me and have seen some of the other events that have been organized by IGLEF, and the idea is to have a frank, candid, and very open conversation in preparation for this event, in informal conversations with Gerónimo. We agreed that we are going to do this like a very relaxed conversation over a cup of coffee, where I'm going to start asking him a couple of questions, and from there we are going to have a dialogue. And I will also invite participants to use the chat box to pose any questions. And the idea will be to see how Gerónimo's proposal stands scrutiny, and also see how Gerónimo's proposal can contribute to change, particularly in the current post-pandemic scenario. Call me hopeful if you want, that I'm already calling it the post-pandemic scenario, but there are some lights of hope, at least. I think that the vaccines are changing the landscape. We just need to push for a quick rollout of vaccines around the world, and probably even Gerónimo have something to contribute to that debate. And before I give the floor to Gerónimo, I'd like to finish this introduction or this warm welcome by saying that Gerónimo also is a Queen Mary alumnus. So I'm delighted to be welcoming him back to his home in London. Gerónimo, very warm welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I think that I don't remember exactly when was the last time that we saw each other. I don't remember if it was at the OECD in Paris or was at a meeting in Washington, but in any event, Gerónimo, I'm delighted to see you among us today.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Thank you very much to everyone attending this event. I know how extraordinary times we are experiencing all, and I am happy that so many have the time to reflect about how to reduce poverty. And thank you very much to Queen Mary. I've been studying law and economic development almost 20 years ago, and I have my best memories, and indeed it's my home. Thank you very much. So Rodrigo, I am open to an interesting discussion, and let's get straightforward into the topic.
Hopefully we'll not develop into a discussion, it will be more of a conversation, but Gerónimo, tell me, what is this book that you have published that you have titled Simple? What is it about? If you can define, let's say in one line, what is that you are trying to achieve, or what is your proposal about?
Simple is a proposal, an idea to transform the future of those poor countries into one of where job creation is facilitated. I've been working in development for all my life. I've been working in research, I've been working in operations with multilateral development banks, mainly loans that trigger reforms, and I've been working in the field. And one thing that I came to learn is that this question, how to reduce poverty, how, is a very pragmatic question. So what we are doing, and I mean we because I worked in this book with a team, is putting forward a proposal that makes sense in terms of what to reform to emerge from poverty. And I am building on global research that was produced by the World Bank. For all of those that are not familiar with, like almost 20 years ago, the World Bank presented the Doing Business project, which was basically mapping business regulation around the world. So what I did was, okay, I took those universal fundamentals about what good regulation is, how the government regulates the private sector, and when such regulation is good, the private sector is able to blossom and create wealth and jobs. But when such a regulation is bad, the private sector fails to create jobs, fails to create wealth, and poverty is what it's the outcome. So on that global research agenda, which I was part of, I decided to take it forward, to take it one extra mile. So in Simple, I decided to take that agenda into 20 countries, which is basically the 20 countries of Latin America that have the same legal origin, that somehow have been failing for 200 years, and basically say, okay, what can we reform in those 20 countries that would make sense to those 20 countries? But of course, this is being designed with a replicable approach.
Gerónimo, that was one long sentence, but there's a lot to unpack from that line, Gerónimo, because basically you have brought in, for me, I think that 2 or 3 key takeaways. I understand that Simple is a proposal to reduce and hopefully eradicate poverty, and it rests on some pillars, which my feeling that you have just flirted with the idea, but you have not got deep into it. But before I ask you to do that, there are a couple of concepts that I would like you to probably enlarge, or I don't know if you prefer me to give you kind of the floor for 5-7 minutes to expand it further, but you were talking about doing business for corporations, right? The Doing Business project, the World Bank Doing Business, the benchmark indicators, and you were talking about corporations. So is this proposal focusing on companies/corporations, or it goes beyond that into individuals or by helping corporations facilitate the way in which they will do business, indirectly will alleviate the suffering of people? That's one question. And the second one is probably more general. It's about, you're talking about poverty reduction and you're talking to help the poor. But do you have a working definition of poor, or how will you classify what constitutes poor or poverty? We have a kind of a colloquial, or each one has a different understanding of what poverty means. But I was wondering whether there is a specific working definition that you use. And the last concept, because I want to understand how these three, I think these three can help us understand better your proposal, is because you mentioned almost in passing good and bad regulation. And that's, apologies, Geronimo, but I am trying to give this an academic framework, which is, how do we know if regulation is good? How do we know if regulation is bad? What is the benchmark? And if you can illustrate that with a couple of examples.
Sure. Good. So let's go.
So sorry, I think there were too many things, but probably
no. It's fine. Let's go into the proposal. The proposal targets private sector development. Private sector development means that the private sector is the one that creates jobs. Okay, so regulation from the governments should promote and facilitate private sector development. When you go to poor countries, and the poor countries that I have studied, you notice that the private sector has a different, they have different participations in job creation and in the creation of wealth. Let me put it this way. The 1% of big companies, let me repeat that, the 1% of big companies of these 20 countries that I have studied contribute to 75% of the tax pie. So they're big contributors. So if you think about it, the business model of these poor countries is it's politicians basically aligning the business model with that 1% of big companies. However, these big companies only hire, let's say, 40% of the people. But since they contribute to 75% of the pie, they're the key players. What I am saying in the proposal is that the remaining 99% is very much out of the picture. The remaining 99% is micro, small, and medium firms, which we could call them SMEs or micro SMEs. So 99% create for 60% of the jobs. However, they only contribute to 25% of the wealth and tax contributions. So this 99% in a way has been absent from the development model of these 20 countries that I have studied. How it goes, governments mostly do business with this 1% of companies, and then they redistribute to the rest of society. That business model that has been used in many of the Latin Americans that I have been studying somehow is not enough. You need to think how to engage that remaining 99% of the private sector that create jobs. In addition to that, 50% of society in these 20 countries is absolutely informal, so they're off the charts. Should you integrate that 50%, it would only increase the amount of that 99%. So 99% would be 99.999%. That 99%, it's pretty much small firms. From that 99%, 90% is micro firms. So it's 1, 2, 3 people. Do you think that really these people could start up a business hiring lawyers, hiring accountants, hiring, paying high taxes to do business. It's impossible for them. It's impossible to start a business, to close a business, to import, to export, to hire people, to fire people. That's why informality is sort of the rule, and unemployment is the rule in many of these countries. The only way, and I'll get back to your questions, the only way is to facilitate that these small firms that do business have very simple rules. And here is where I go straight forward with the proposals. They need very simple rules, so simple that everyone can understand them. And when I mean everyone is, if within your society you have a lot, millions of people actually, with very low levels of formal education, you need to speak a language that allows for them to do business in the formality with the minimum technical requirements. 2, digitalization. You need these people to interact with the government in a digital way. And let's go straight forward into that. Poor people in these countries have 3 priorities: to eat, access potable water, and buy a mobile phone. The only piece of technology that these people have is their mobile phone. So governments should relate to society at large, regulating in a digital way so that they can do it via the mobile phone. And the third point, which is very important of the proposal, is when you have small or poor countries that basically doing business within their jurisdiction is not enough. You have to help these small firms to be able to do business with other jurisdictions as well, expand the pie, regionalize. If you have 20 countries that are that have the same legal origin, that speak the same language, it should be easy to align how small firms do cross-border trading with other small firms to expand the pie. For example, you are speaking in Latin America about 650 million people that could be doing business together. They don't see themselves as a region internally, but they definitely see them as a region when you look at them from the United States, China, or Russia, or Europe. And these same principles can apply to, let's say, French-speaking countries in Africa or English-speaking countries in Africa. So the proposal goes into that direction. Poverty. How to reduce poverty? By creating jobs. And while creating jobs, in every job creation, taking someone from poverty. So it's not about granting subsidies, but it's about facilitating job creation. And who creates jobs the most in poor countries? Very small firms. The only way is to bring them into formality. They cannot enter formality if you have high cost, high complexity procedures, and interacting with the government is a burden. So what's good regulation? Or let's put it the other way around to answer your question. What's bad regulation? It's cumbersome regulation. If I have to pay high taxes, if I have to make a lot of filings, if I have to hire plenty of professional services to open my business or to close my business, then that's bad regulation. Where you see informality soaring, which is pretty much in all emerging markets, that's the indicator of bad regulation, informality. If I am telling you that 20 countries have 50% of people within informality, that's bad regulation.
Geronimo, a couple of quick reactions.
Please.
You still haven't answered what is poverty or poor country, but we will come back to that in due course. But when you were talking about the 99% versus the 1%, when you were talking about how you split the pie among countries around the world, sorry, not about companies within these 20 economies, one of the things that the initial reaction that it came to my mind was under US bankruptcy law, under Chapter 11, for example, to approve a plan, and sorry if I am biased because you know that I do mostly debt and crisis, but there there's an element there that to approve a plan, for example, a restructuring plan, the majority requirement is a double majority. It's one in economic value and another one in numerosity of players. And basically what you are saying here is that the system seems to not be protecting the entirety of the players, but basically focusing on those that represent the greater economic value, but not necessarily numerosity, right? And I think that this is something that you can relate to in what you're trying to put forward, that basically there need to be probably some additional checks and balances to make sure that there's a due and proper representation of society, for which when you talk about government, but I think that it goes beyond government and legislators. Who do they govern for? And the other thing, Geronimo, is you were talking about bad regulation, and I agree with you when it becomes quite obvious what is bad. And again, on a country mission, when I was working as an expert consultant for the World Bank, I ended up in two countries in Central America, and on one of them I was talking to the equivalent of the law society, or the sorry, not the law society, yeah, the equivalent of the law society, and then I end up talking to the Registry of Commerce or the Companies House, and they were saying, how many companies have been liquidated? And the answer is none. Actually, there was only one which was liquidated through a law procedure. But other than that, for the last 10 years or so, there have been only one company being liquidated. Why? Because, and that I think that strengthens your thesis, that basically it's so cumbersome and burdensome for small, medium, micro, and nano enterprises to fulfill the requirement that they just let companies become zombie companies or dormant companies, that they are just there waiting till the company's house gets bored and just strike them off.
Well, let me react to that. So let's begin with poverty. For example, when I take these 20 countries from Latin America, 1 of 3 have been poor for the past 50 years. I'll have data that I'll share with you after this. Please go ahead.
No, that if you want to share some data or...
Yeah, I'll do it in a minute. I'll do it all together in a moment. So 1 in 3 have been poor for the past 50 years. So this means that everything has been tried. You have countries such as Venezuela that you can say today that are complete failed states, that they have tried with a socialist approach. But even if you go to what you might say the most successful capitalist student, which might be Chile, Chile has also failed to sort of deal with poverty in a very efficient way. So you have, as a rule, 1 out of 3 that remain in poor. What's poverty? When people don't have money to pay for an essential standard of living. And here goes the answer. When people don't have the money to pay for a basic standard of living, that's when they are poor. But in Latin America, and this is a poll that was done, for example, before the pandemic, 1 in 2 feel poor. So in terms, the World Bank might classify which might be middle-income countries or high-income countries. But when you go to society, technically 1 in 3 is poor and 1 in 2 feels poor. They self-classify themselves as poor. So I would say that that's poverty. And what we're going to see after the pandemic, which I still think is a pandemic, I would say that poverty will remain the rule. How do you emerge from poverty? And you were speaking about rules. And what I'm saying is, for example, here you have countries that have inherited rules from the colonialist process. Okay, so let's say I've studied these 20 countries that adopted the French legal system, right? So they inherited rules that were designed by Napoleon 200 years ago. At that time, I'm sure Napoleon couldn't figure out that the internet was coming and that small firms would be the rule in Latin America, for example. So we have these rules, which are cumbersome regulation for everything. So you have bad rules that somehow evolve into bad institutions. What do I mean by bad institutions? Bureaucracy, the time, cost, and complexity to interact with government is very high. For example, in Bolivia, they had a contest to see what was the worst nightmare you had interacting with government. And the winner was a guy who wanted his education diploma and had to go thousands of times to queue to get his diploma. That's an example. So bad regulation is associated to corruption. Bad regulation is associated to poor outcomes. When the government fails to facilitate the private sector to blossom, that's when governments get it wrong. And that has been the rule in most poor countries. So what I'm bringing to the table is, yes, it is difficult to reinvent every rule, but you can still rewrite those rules for that segment, which is the 99% that will create the most amount of jobs ever. And that's the key to economic development in Latin America. And I'm sure that that could be replicable to the rest of the world. But the diagnosis has targeted 10% of the world population.
Gerónimo, you're talking about the good and the bad regulation, and I have here a very good question posted by Fernando Barrio. Fernando, would you like to unmute yourself to ask a question? I'm happy to ask it on your behalf if you prefer. But Fernando, if you would like to unmute yourself or open your camera, if not, I'm happy to.
I think that I'm live now. I don't know if you can see
Yes,
me.
you are, Fernando.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today.
No, please.
Hello, Fernando.
Yeah, hello, Gerónimo. How are you? And thank you, Rodrigo, for organizing this. No, the question, Gerónimo, relates to, by focusing in Latin America, we could agree by the result that regulation is bad. So without analyzing it, actually, it seems to have the problem for creating a benchmark. And therefore, some of the conclusions might be a little arguably of the chart. And therefore, the question is whether it is not necessary to actually autonomously, particularly of Latin America, create a benchmark first, and then apply to see whether the regulation is bad or good. If not, we create a danger of putting the conclusion and then put anything in the middle to justify the conclusion instead of actually doing the process to reach what the problem is. And I finish. It came because you were mentioning three aspects: digitalization, well, which is what I've been doing for centuries, and then when you conclude, you add high taxes, which was not part of your framework originally. So, and that is when it makes the noise, because then when we have countries, we have very, very, very low poverty rates, and the taxes are higher than in Latin America. So, and that create this dichotomy.
Sorry, I say no, never said high taxes, eh?
Oh, yes, you said.
No, I said, well, okay, but the point is, it has to be very low taxes, almost no cost, zero complexities, and zero time to open a business. So let me go straight forward into the data to clarify that. Thank you very much. Can we put some of the slides, Rodrigo, so that I can address Fernando's question? And I'll go to the data, and then I'll go again to the proposal. Okay.
Gerónimo, here are your slides.
Okay, so let's go to the first one. Let's go to the first one. When we studied this region, we have 50 years of low growth. Everything has been tried, inefficiency has not been achieved. And when you take a look at 50 years, you have basically 50 years of absolute failure, where I would say the region at last, the region has somehow failed. What I have been trying to do is to see, okay, so we have very important research from the World Bank that says those countries that help the private sector develop can raise out of poverty. Okay, so here we have 50 years of countries dealing only with poverty. Let's or with low growth. Let's go to the next one. Poverty in Latin America has been, as a percentage of population, you can say has been at 1/3 on average. This has been the rule. And nothing has really changed in terms of this is likely to go up after the pandemic. So you can say that 1 in 3 have been poor for at least 50 years. So poverty, it's pretty much structural. It is a failed region, if you want. And here you have, you can say that both political experiments from the right and left have been tried, but you have no success case. Let's continue. Unemployment has been always the rule. You have very high and persistent unemployment. Here I am recording from 2000 onwards, but it is likely to continue for the next 10 years at the very least, unless reforms are adopted. Let's continue. Informality and poverty. I was saying bad regulation. You can see informality as pretty much the rule in every country, literally. We coexist with informality. Just go to any capital city and you will see poor people, poverty and informality coexisting in all urban areas, for example. Let's move to the next one.
I think that this slide is quite telling. It's quite telling.
Yes.
It will be interesting to see the average mark between poor and middle class in the whole of in each country and across the region.
Well, if you go to the last bar, you see that poor people, informality in poor people is 72%.
This one you're referring?
No, that was the one before. But sorry. Yes, the last on the right, it says that overall you have 72% of poor people. Right. So informality targets poor people. Let's move to the next one, which is, I would say, the key to unleashing the potential of the private sector. When I was working at Doing Business, they were making no differences between the private sector. But when you look at the one on the left, it basically says that small firms, micro enterprises, account for 88.4%. So basically, there you have that very small firms are pretty much the Latin America's private sector, and that's pretty much the rule in most poor countries. Very small firms, very small firms find it difficult to gain access to formality, to create jobs. And let me answer one of the questions that was there. How can we help these small firms gain access to formality? They need very simple rules that anyone can understand. When you write those rules, let's say how to open a business, it has to be pretty much as you open an Instagram account. How do you open an Instagram account? Pretty much it's intuitive. Okay, so you don't pay money, you put a few pieces of information, you don't need to hire an attorney, you don't need to hire an accountant, you don't need to pay taxes, you open an Instagram account. And that's how people are doing business anyway today, in an informal digital environment. What government should do is provide a formal digital environment that's intuitive, especially for these very small firms. Otherwise, the new generations will be outside formality, doing business within, I would say, a digital informality. Okay, so when you go to the one down, you see that large companies contribute to 75.4% of the tax pie. Why do we have, I would say, a business model that doesn't work? Because you have governments doing business or facilitating doing business to this 1%. These 1% are the only ones that can survive bad regulation, are the only ones that can survive poor rules. These rules that are difficult, they can pay for big firms to register their companies. They can go bankrupt if they need, as you were saying, Rodrigo. They can file for whatever financial statement they need, but basically small firms cannot. So these small firms would need very, very simple rules, basic rules, basic, even almost not speaking a legal language. Yes, there are small, medium, and micro firms. Micro is less than 5, and medium is, I would say, less than 200 people. But overall, whatever is not large. Let's go to the next one, and so that we finish the slides, and then we can go back. When you see small firms and exports, I'm here taking 3 countries. You can see that very small firms don't export at all. They don't do business across borders. Small firms pretty much don't either. Medium firms almost, and I'm bringing Chile, which is the most successful country in Latin America. Only large firms do import-export transactions. So again, if you focus your business model in the 1% of big companies, you're not going to sort of create more jobs that take people out from development. That's why simple is a one word that summarizes the approach. The only way to facilitate job creation is to integrate the remaining 99%. In addition to that, that 99%, as said before, has to bring in the 50% or more that's in informality. Data backs that. Let's go to the next one. Ease of doing business. I know that this is highly controversial because the doing business ranking is highly controversial, especially at this time. But the ideas are correct. None of the countries is on the top 50. Forget about what if the rankings are controversial or not. Anyway, they all rank really bad. What I mean in terms of bad regulation is that when you go to the column of the right, which is the ease of doing business in every of these countries is expensive. Doing business in any of these countries is complex. Doing business in any of these countries is cumbersome. So governments have failed to facilitate the private sector to blossom. Jobs cannot be created. Poverty soars. The business model fails. Okay, access to credit. Yes, of course, access to credit is part. I've studied that. When I say what should be simplified, it's the whole life cycle of a small company. So you open the company, you close the company. You hire people, you fire people. You import, you export. You access to credit, you pay your taxes. Everything should be simple. Taxes should be, let's say, a flat tax, as minimal as possible, so that you have an incentive to enter into formality. The best case scenario would be that you could open your company over the phone in just one intuitive procedure at zero cost. That would be the best case scenario, so that job creation is facilitated. Job creation in these very small firms should be something that doesn't add value. For example, millennials, centennials, pandemials will hire people just for a few months for a project. How do we adapt to that flexible model? If rules cannot be changed for that 1% of companies, then keep them just as they are, cumbersome, with lawyers, with attorneys, with labor unions, with plenty of rights that are beautiful on paper, but don't work at all, and facilitate job creation in these SMEs.
Gerónimo,
Yes.
Before we go to the next slide, do you have an estimate of the average time to incorporate a company in LATAM?
Yes, when you go to the rankings, it's usually a few months.
Months.
Yes. When you go to but let's put it this way: how many services do you need to hire? How many languages do you need to understand? Let's put it this way. You have an informal woman selling, I don't know, fruits and vegetables on the streets. Say you want to take her to formality, okay? You have to explain her the legal options that she has to open a company. Then you have to help her understand where she would need to register her company and which licenses she will need. Then the accounting standards she will have to comply with. Then the taxes she will have to be paying, and then the social contributions for each person that will be working with her. It's nonsense, it's ridiculous, it's obsolete. That's why the young people, the youngest people, are already becoming I would say, digital entrepreneurs with no rules. They're paying for their services with Bitcoin or PayPal, and they're opening their accounts with one Instagram web page. And basically, everything is going, wealth is being created outside the scope of governments. If government wants to solve the problem of poverty, and this proposal has been, let me be very clear in this regard. I know that this might sound quite extreme, but this proposal was presented to CSIS, the #1 think tank in the United States, and they said, good proposals, highly to be implemented in Latin America. They have been endorsed by Simeon Dyankov, creator of the Doing Business Project. It builds on legal origin, the theory of Andrei Schleifer, the #1 economist in the world that has endorsed the book. They have been presented at CNN as a recipe for poverty reduction by Andres Oppenheimer, the #1, I would say, policy journalist in Latin America. My point is, I know it sounds against what we have studied at university, but it's also true that we are failing on a systematic basis. And we can go to slide 1, and I can tell you that the next 50 years, if we remain doing the same, will be pretty much the same or even worse. So in terms of providing a solution, I can tell you that I'm also providing a vision. If we don't reform, poverty will soar even more. If we don't facilitate job creation, poverty will continue to escalate. So who creates jobs? Small firms, micro firms, SMEs. They need very simple, intuitive rules. Otherwise, unless it's like governments are now digitalizing, they're digitalizing bureaucracy. That's what we see. They're mostly taking bureaucracy into a digital scenario. But if they don't take it to the mobile phone, that effort, it's pretty much pointless, because the beneficiaries they are trying to get to have mobile phones. That's the level of connectivity that they have. So we have to be, in a way, very smart to understand the audience that you are trying to regulate. Otherwise, we have the levels of informality that I have described a moment ago. Should we go to the next slide? Latin America versus Europe and Central Asia. Here is where you can see basically the gap between what we were discussing. If doing business is difficult and costly, through time, the gap only shows you how little you can grow, which goes to the first slide. So in a way, until poor countries understand that business regulation is the possibility of unleashing the wealth creation of the private sector, and that job creation reduces poverty, we will be continuing pushing the wrong agendas. Let's go to the next one. Bad rules, bad procedures. When you take a look at, for example, OECD standards and Latin America, here again, you can see the importance of legal origins. All these countries, here we have, and that's why I wanted to work with a bunch of countries that I've known, but also have the same rules. I excluded, when you go to, when you take a look at these countries, they have all received the same rules at the same time. They have all evolved in the same way, in many ways. They have all somehow managed the same level of complexity in terms of regulation and procedures. Red tape is pretty much the same. You will have the same problems to do business in Mexico as in Colombia or Argentina. Why? Rules were pretty much the same. Institutions are pretty much similar, and the bottlenecks take you to a similar outcome.
Geronimo, just to break this up a little bit. So basically, this is the average for LATAM. This is the average at OECD countries.
Yes.
And this is the performance of each country in LATAM regarding complexity of regulatory procedures, right?
Right.
What do you have here under regulatory procedures? What are the indicators? What are the benchmarks that are feeding into, for example, this 4.3 in Nicaragua?
Well, when you go to this is based on IDB on IDB understanding of how difficult it is to interact with the government. Everything that you have to do, it has a high level of complexity.
And this takes into account the 8 indicators of the doing business.
No. This is from IDB. It's how many times you have to go personally or to pay for things when you go to interact with governments. This is not. This has to go. This is pure regulation with interaction with the government. The point is.
And do you remember which are the industries or the sectors that have been taken into account into that regulation? Is it just basically create a company? Because company creation is also an indicator of the World Bank. That's what I was trying to establish. What is the overlap between this chart and the data that we get from the World Bank? Or I know it's
World Bank is basically data on how you and how you run your business. This is data on how you interact, how the private sector or how individual citizens interact with governments. In this case, what you have is a measurement of how difficult it is to engage in whatever you want with your own government. And it just shows how Latin America.
These are permits, authorizations, taxes,
yes,
etc. Yeah.
Yes, but it just signals how difficult it is to engage in whatever you want. And here I bring an argument which is quite, I would say, relevant. Complex rules inevitably take you to complex institutions. Show up at any ministry that you want, and you will see an organizational chart of plenty and plenty of, I would say, people assuming responsibilities that you don't have a clarity on who does what, but basically you have plenty of people with different power positions across plenty of ministries, and that's the rule in most poor countries. That shows you how each of them will run a focus of regulatory creation. When you have bad rules, you end up creating bad institutions that end up creating even more bad regulation. So it is an endless process. And the more bad rules you have, the more bad regulation you have. And what's the outcome? A poor business culture, which is what we have today. Doing business, it's outside the culture of most. And what we listen in poor countries, it's a continuous discussion about how to redistribute. And redistributing is basically taking from that 1% the proceeds and redistributing to the other ones that don't have. That's why I am saying, hey, if relating with your government is complex, at the end of the day, you're only showing that more cumbersome regulation, more red tape will be created, and it will be very difficult.
Geronimo, so basically what you are
the private sector.
Geronimo, what you are telling us is that, and let me borrow from some economists that they talk about the original sin. So the original sin is a concept that usually has been coined for governments that are borrowing from the capital markets in a strong currency or a foreign currency. But here, if I would like to borrow that concept to apply to your proposal. So you are telling me what the main, it might not be the main takeaway, but an important takeaway of your proposal is that the original sin is regulating for a few rather than regulating for the most. And when we regulate for the most, the other 99%, we should aim based on the degree of informality to make simple rules to make sure that everybody will understand, simple rules that will not create unnecessary burden that can translate into either costs or disincentives for people to abandon informality and continue operating in an informal market. And digitalization, because that's something to which everybody has access through a phone. And that's why, again, it kind of reinforces on each other that basically digitalization needs to be simple because it's going to be done through a phone. So basically it will not be uploading 15 million documents. It will not be typing a long letter because it's basically just ticking boxes because you will be doing it on the phone, right?
I agree 100% with your summary. I think that you put it in a nutshell, and that is the key to economic development in the poor countries that I have studied, and I think that that is replicable. Research from a global standpoint point in that direction. When I take it pragmatically, I am saying, yes, those are the reforms that you have to adopt.
Okay.
Indeed.
Am I missing anything from that summary, or?
That is the first step. I am not saying that's the only thing that you have to do. Of course, you have other agendas, but that is the first step to unleash the economic potential of that private sector. So let's finish, if you want, with these presentations, and then we can go to an open dialogue again. So slow, complex, and costly procedures. The rule is that everything is difficult. People perceive that doing things are difficult. On the contrary, and let me give you an example. You have Estonia, which I'm quoting as an inspiration to have, where 99% of the interaction between the citizens and the government is digital. Okay, why governments? Why governments? Governments have I've received a question that I'll answer. Governments have adopted these rules. Countries receive these rules that somehow are difficult to deal with. Every 4 or 5 years, I'll get to the translation later. Hold on one second. Let's put it this way. Every 4 or 5 years, every politician that wants to get elected says, hey, I am going to reduce poverty, vote for me, and I am going to create jobs. Please vote for me. 2 things that every politician promises in every election. The question that I am bringing to the table is how? How do you plan on doing it? And the answer is, you have to facilitate job creation for poverty reduction. How do you facilitate job creation? By drafting and approving very simple rules, just one law that makes sense for the culture of your country, where you can open and close the company, hire and fire people, and above all, import, export, do business in the life cycle of your company, just using your phone and paying the minimum possible cost for you to create wealth. And when you pay taxes, you should need that application to calculate the taxes for you. And that's why I am bringing the case of Estonia, because in this digital era, finding an open source environment to do business should replace hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats that are telling you, hey, I want to help you. I might not need your help. Just queue and I'll give you, let's say, training for you to do business. I might not need that training. I only need not to interact with you. I need to know how to do business. And I understand that I need to register a few things. Let me do business. Let me wire money. Let me hire people. Let me fire people. Let me hire people for 2 months or 20 months, but not necessarily for life. Let's go to the next one. digitize to simplify procedures. When you see digitalization in the region is still at very early stages. That's why bureaucracy is still the rule. That's why queuing to file paperwork still remains the rule. That's why people spend hours doing it. So poverty would be basically a political issue. I would say politicians very much have a business model that I would say that somehow manages poverty, but doesn't solve it. To solve poverty, you have to facilitate job creation. No one, at least in these 20 countries that I have studied, and I would say that this could extend to pretty much 70% of the world, is dealing with poverty as a top priority. To reduce poverty, poverty has to be the #1 priority. Otherwise,
Gerónimo, are you talking about governments? Are you talking about, because I understand that the mandate of many of the multilateral organizations is to work towards the reduction of poverty, and I would say you being a Washington, let's say, disciple, I think
yes,
that you might have, with that big statement, you might have just stepped on 2 or 3 people's toes by saying nobody's working to reduce poverty at the moment.
No, what I am saying is that we used to have poverty reduction. Let's say, let's go to the 80s or 90s. Poverty reduction, let's go to the Millennium Development Goals. Poverty reduction was the, I would say, the light and the #1 priority. Now, the international agenda has so many priorities that it's difficult to have just one priority. It's reducing poverty in a sustainable way, also observing climate change indicators, and it's like gender, money laundering. We have 20 things on the table, and I would say that inevitably poverty reduction somehow dilutes within that. In addition to that, in the 80s or 90s, you would see multilateral development banks pushing for a series of reforms that they thought would lead to growth. Many of them failed because, of course, they were of a macro nature. What I am saying is that now they are somehow allowing for countries to deal with these decisions, and they would somehow back their decisions and finance their priorities mostly. And of course, they contribute with research. They do an extraordinary job in terms of research. My point is that, okay, if countries are going to lead their way out of poverty, then you have to think it within your cultural framework. And what I'm saying is, here we have 20 countries that they're not going to be receiving foreign direct investment for the next many years, as many other countries in the world that are not going to be, I would say, benefiting necessarily from trading with other countries. They have to think for themselves. And how do you think for yourself? Simplifying your regulation and digitalizing the service, the public service that governments should provide. And what I'm bringing is the concept of efficiency. Efficiency is not from the right nor the left, it's efficiency. Efficiency in dealing with small firms will take you forward. If what we are trying is to reduce poverty, then we must gain efficiency in the provision of services from the public sector to the private sector, with a focus on that private sector that will create jobs. We need to put at the center this main actor, small firms, that has been absent from the process of wealth creation for too many decades. Let's finish with the slides if you want. Okay, so here we have take advantage of mobile phones. And when you see mobile phones, the one on light gray, I mean, it's mobile phones. It's your only alternative. When you see Estonia, of course, but when you see Costa Rica, Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, the only way to reach out to your society, to rural areas, to the poorest, is to really engage with them at the mobile phone. And the mobile phone, which we mostly use to, let's say, interact or social media or entertainment, is a computer that can boost the private sector. especially the small firms. So my point is, let's make it. It's the only hardware that we have around. Governments could bring the software so that with one app, they facilitate people in hiring other people, smart contracts, and above all, the interaction between the public sector and the private sector. That's the way that these poor countries could manage to boost and unleash the wealth creation capacity that the private sector could have. But this is still not being observed. We're still digitalizing as if everyone would have a computer at home, and that's not the rule.
Geronimo, here this means that in Costa Rica, for example, and in Uruguay, people have everybody has at least one. I'm not everyone, but basically out of 100 inhabitants,
there are more phones than people.
Than 100 people. There are more than 100 phones than 100 people.
Yes,
so people
and I would say that
phone.
even if you take let's say the worst of all, Guatemala or Honduras, and I'll give you an example. The president of El Salvador, which is somehow controversial sometimes, when the pandemic broke out, said, "Hey, we have failed. We have failed dramatically because informality is the rule. I want to give them, for example, $300 to every family, but I can't because the latest census was, I think, 10 years ago. And basically, I don't know where people are, and people are not formally in a banking system. So even if I have the money, I can't give the money to these people, to my people. At times of need, I am failing in an informal sector to reach out to those in need." So again, what's poverty? When Argentina had its first pandemic breakout, the government offered a subsidy and 25% of society showed up on the streets to cash it out on the same day. So in a way, the example of El Salvador saying, hey, 90% of society is informal, we have a problem, and 25% classified poor as themselves on the same day, it shows you how fragile the situation is. And the only way to bring them into formality is to lower the levels of requirements of that formality, at least for those in the micro, small, and medium size companies, because that is the key to economic development in these countries and in most of the countries that so far has failed to achieve growth.
Geronimo, we are living in a post-pandemic world, and I'm going to go now into inviting people to actually participate. While I was on full screen mode showing the slides, I've not been able to scroll through the questions, but I'm going to do that now. What I want to know is, in a post-pandemic world, I think that we have a great opportunity for change. Tell me, if we can choose, you have been appointed as special advisor to the government X, and you need to, and I ask you, dear Geronimo, good, trusted international expert and advisor to myself, where shall I start? What will you do first?
Well,
bear in mind that we need to be realistic, because I am elected by the people, and if not, tomorrow I'll be out. Where shall we start?
Well, I can't give the name of the country, but currently today it's being presented before, for example, a cabinet. And the idea is, we have already been discussing it with the country, and the idea is where to start. Go straight to finding a diagnosis of where you can how can you sort of build on what the country has and accelerate the pace of reform? And you are right, when things are going wrong, it's a good moment for reform. These are extraordinary times for reform because things are going wrong. The expectations of this lasting longer than expected are high. Despite vaccinations in poor countries, the feeling that this is going to extend, I would say, the scope of poverty, it's creating worriness that new generations are not going to have a possibility to sort of hope. So the point is, the new generations are ready to engage in reform. The youngest are ready to engage in reform. Also, when I speak to the poorest countries are ready to engage in reform. They are ready to innovate. I know that from an academic standpoint, there might be some sort of word of caution. Hey, over the years, we have created so many standards, so many best practices, so many, I would say, internationally accepted principles. But on the other end, the poorest countries are saying, hey, this has not been working for us. Let's reinvent whatever needs to be reinvented because I have a very short period of time to engage in reform. And when I tell them, hey, take everything to the simplest possible scenario, they say, okay, lovely, let's go for it. So I can tell you that between what we are discussing today, which is, okay, how far away is this proposal from mainstream development economics and from mainstream development regulation, I am telling you that those seeking reforms are at the exactly opposite end. They are saying, hey, take me at the minimum amount of time to the maximum level of innovation. And innovation is, okay, how can I make it as simple so that everyone understands those rules? And which software can help me digitalize the way that I interact with people so that they have an ID that's universal to do business with, and a digital signature so that they can use to engage in contracts. And basically every interaction with the government is regulated in an efficient and costly way. We have been young some years ago, and we were used to doing CVs. We used to have CVs and apply to companies. The new generations might write their CVs, but they will have mostly no one to send it massively as we had. Options in these poor countries are going to run smaller. So many will become entrepreneurs because they love being entrepreneurs, but most of them will become entrepreneurs by necessity. They will have to invent their own jobs. And if governments are going to face a situation where people will have to invent their own jobs, at the very least, keep it simple for them. Simple means zero time, zero cost, zero complexity, or the closest thing to that.
Geronimo, we have a few questions here, and I think that everybody now is convinced that the way forward is just simple, and that will allow us to reduce poverty. But Geronimo, there are several questions. I'm not sure whether they have been answered, but the first one is, what do you think of neoliberalism in relation to poverty reduction?
Well, neoliberalism, it's a very broad question. What I am saying is, neoliberalism has been an approach for a period of time that has worked well for many countries, but not for poor countries. What I am suggesting with simple is to take, I would say, neoliberalism or capitalism to its full potential at the MSME sector.
It's a simplified version of the model for the developed countries, which is targeting the other 99 informal.
Right. Yes. So far, neoliberalism has not been there. Let's try it within that 99%. Yes.
Geronimo, then we have basically, do you see any meaningful correlation between the country legal system and the vast number of SMEs. Is there a correlation between the type of legal system that the country has and how SMEs have grown exponentially, or they have evolved into big companies?
Yes, this is very controversial. This was published like 20 years ago, and it was very controversial when common law countries were performing better and Nordic countries were performing better than French legal origin countries. Just because French legal origin countries tend to create more cumbersome regulation. But I think that was, I would say, that was a theoretical discussion. This is what we have. Every country has a set of rules. The question is not how which system is better than the other. The question is how to make it more efficient, evolving from what you already have. Every country has its own history, its own bottlenecks. Everyone knows what to reform. That's why reform has to be within the culture of each country, because at the end of the day, you know your own problems. And as it happens in a personal life, you end up solving your own problems. As it happens in a family, the family ends up solving its own problems. Countries will have to face their own problems. And countries that are next to other countries that have a similar legal origin, a similar culture, could benefit from doing business together.
Geronimo, I have Cecilia Cook has put forward, there are two entries from her. The first one has two questions, and then there's another one which is probably slightly more controversial.
Please.
Cecilia, would you mind opening your microphone? Because I think there are two or three questions, and I think it probably would be better if you articulate the questions directly. If I'm happy to be your speaker otherwise.
No, that's fine. Hello for everybody. I'm from Argentina. And one of my questions was, how can we get the people with these ideas go to the power in our countries? Because I really share what you are saying about poverty, how to solve poverty. But I think that the governments have to change. And how can we in Latin America do these people to get into the power? And the other question was, in the meantime, I'm in the private sector. What can we do to help? Because I'm not a government. I cannot make the rules.
Simpler.
But what can I do to help? Because I think this is the way. The way to reduce poverty is creating jobs. I have no doubt about it. So what can I do from the private sector? And the last comment, more controversial. I know I don't want to make any controversial, but I read many years ago when I was studying at the university, Max Weber, and I found that there has been a relationship between Protestant culture and Catholic culture, and the further development of the countries in economic point of view, and the idea of paternalism, that it's very common in Latin America. People is waiting everything or a lot from the government. People is not thinking about doing things by ourselves or by themselves. There's a great degree of expecting from someone something, providence, God, government. And so sometimes it's a cultural issue, but I don't want to be controversial. I just wanted to point it out that I found Max Weber ideas very interesting. And that's all. And then my first two questions.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Good. So with regard how to
Sorry,
get to
Geronimo, and also it's for Ahmed. Ahmed has raised the same question because he has
okay.
He says, because I think that in Egypt we are facing the same problem with government and the legal system that is inherited from the French one, and it is hardly developed.
Right.
And basically, do you think that the French or Latin legal system are the same cause of poverty? And this is Ahmed building up on Cecilia's first and second question about how the private sector can contribute and what they can do if they are not in government, or how can they assist from the private sector, and what do these people that are, and sorry, Geronimo, if I'm going to oversimplify your well-thought proposal, but basically this pragmatism, how can pragmatism take over bureaucracy. I think that that's in a nutshell, Cecilia, and I see Cecilia agreeing, and that what Ahmed is building on, and also saying whether the origins of the problems in Egypt that are to an extent developed from the civil law tradition are the same as in Latin America.
Well, let me thank you very much, because I'll go to Cecilia's question, but since Ahmed reflections are taking it with a different perspective, I'll build over that first. We are witnessing inefficient democracies with, I would say, inefficient models of capitalism. Such inefficiencies are likely to build tensions in the times ahead. Tensions means violence. What we have witnessed in Colombia, for example, just a few days ago, government decided to increase taxes, and basically people took the streets. And it's not that people took the streets because Colombia increased taxes only that. It's because poor people living in informality got fed up with governments not understanding how to reduce poverty and create jobs. So, and I agree with Ahmed. I mean, this is, I am bringing data from 20 countries, but this has stretched to almost all emerging countries. And with regard to, okay, how to get to the people. Here I have, for example, Cecilia, I decided to go with one approach, which is very straightforward. I could have written this book in English and published it in Washington. That was my first, I was invited to do so. But should I have done that, it would have not entered into, let's say, 20 countries. So I thought, okay, I'll write it in Spanish. I published it in my own country, where of course it's always even more difficult. And I try to get from south to north, to, even if it takes longer, to bring this idea forward. It's not from north to south, not from the World Bank or from IDB downwards. It is from actually that 99% building the case in our own language. So, and what can be done in terms of social media? I've been engaged in LinkedIn. I've been engaged in Twitter. I've been engaging in Instagram. There is growing demand for these topics. People are sick and tired of inefficient governments, but also know that it's inconvenient to create violence. On the contrary, the transition needs to be smart. And there is why you were saying, hey, the private sector, yeah, it's the private sector that creates jobs. That's the bottom line. Keep it simple for that private sector to create jobs. And once you understand who is the key player within the private sector, focus on that, okay? And if your people are uneducated and poor, well, you know your target. You have to right people so that those uneducated and poor people can cope with and comply with. There's where you gain formality. People hire other people to, and growth is created. You were speaking about religion. Well, of course, let's say there is a Protestant, this has been studied. I haven't introduced this on purpose, but there is, for example, in common law, you can say that you have relations between the religion and legal tradition. And if you go, for example, Fernando was speaking about creditor rights. Of course, in common law, you would have, let's say, creditor rights mostly protecting the creditor, while in civil French law countries, you would protect the debtor. Okay, what I'm trying to bring with simple is, okay, let's take it to the center. Let's make it efficient. Let's make it in a way so that you don't protect one nor the other. If the borrower decides to be a borrower and the lender decides to be a lender, let them engage. Let them engage, and let's use smart contracts at the mobile phone level so that the private sector can engage in every contract they want and figure out also with smart contracts how they engage and disengage, even for dispute resolutions, because courts in countries as ours, Cecilia, have failed to deliver a timely service. So what we have is a complete distrust between the private sector and the public sector. We need to sort of bring efficiency to bridge the gap of distrust.
Gerónimo, we are running out of time. We have
Sure.
eight minutes left. I have 3.5 questions because one is still pending from the previous intervention. I might have missed your answer, but I think that basically the correlation between Egypt and Latam based on the civil law, I think that you have answered that
I can go into that, don't worry.
in a very subtle manner, but I think that basically probably and basically, Geronimo, I think that a yes and no answer will suffice. I know your answer, but I would prefer you to give the answer. And then there's another question where we are basically, Mateo is asking whether you can provide an example of a regulation that has tackled the issue of informality. And then I think that the other outstanding question is one about it's Fernando, which would like to dig deeper into the definition of good and bad regulation, and within that question, he's wondering whether that is fleshed out in more detail in the book, and and because basically he thinks that that's very important, and then let's do that, and then we have a request for you. Basically, I would like to thank on behalf of everyone, and if there's any other burning question, the next 5 seconds, please send it through while Geronimo in 2 minutes tackle all these issues.
Let's go straight to the forward. Hernando de Soto, a very well-known economist from Latin America that wrote The Mystery of Capital, tried to bring reform to Egypt and somehow fell short. Egypt today is pretty much similar to as it was years ago. So what we could say is, yes, there are plenty of things between Egypt and Latin America, but you need to draw a diagnosis based on your own culture. What would be acceptable in terms of reform? What would be acceptable in terms of your own society? And I think that in that regard, the diagnosis is essential for the success of reform. And it's not, and I'm bringing a third issue, it's reforming the rules, reforming the software for interaction between the public and the private sector, and communication. It is very essential that people understand that you're shifting from something that's somehow bad to something that's good. An example of regulation. Estonia 35 years ago was a poor country. They saw themselves with the possibility of creating large institutions as everywhere else in Europe. But however, they decided to digitalize as their top priority. By digitalizing and adopting simple regulation, today they are growing, and they are an example of a country that has been able to modernize itself and, I would say, escape the poverty trap. Good and bad regulation. Okay, so bad rules. Latin America, that I have described, regulates a lot. I mean, in excess, too many rules. Bad in terms of complexity. Everything is complex. Even, for example, accountants have difficulties understanding what they need, what is the rule, what are the exceptions. And inconsistent rules change, taxes change. Whatever you need to comply with changes. Good rules, by contrast, would be orderly rules, rules that remain through time. And when you have orderly rules, they develop orderly institutions, meaning that you understand within those institutions what the rules are. And when you have orderly institutions, you have an orderly society, which is what we lack, for example, in Latin America and Egypt. With regard to good and bad regulation, for the sake of time, I'll stop there. We have 3 more minutes, so I'll go back to you.
Geronimo, this is getting more and more interesting, and these short interactions, I like them more because they're more like a ping pong. Let me add to what you were saying about the example about good and bad laws, and you just touch upon taxes, right? And taxes, I think fascinating one. I can tell you a personal experience, and I can tell you, for me, one of the most innovative and better approaches. And I think that this can answer Mateo's question. I don't know if Mateo is still among us. Yes, he's still among us, which is Peru for some time and also Colombia for some time. My understanding is that it's not in force anymore, but due to the constant change of norms, which were creating legal uncertainty, they were allowing foreign companies to go in front of the tax authorities, and for the duration of the contract, if you were a foreign company entering into a contract with a local company, you were allowed to go to the tax authorities and for a small fee, freeze that legal regime, the one that was in force at the time, throughout the duration of the contract. So this was allowing you to have legal certainty as to what will be your direct cost on that contract throughout the life of the contract. Because if the tax regime changes, that will be the one that will be applicable to you. That will have been frozen in time. So this is that. When I found out about this, both in Peru and Colombia, basically my mind exploded, because basically I said, that is brilliant. That is pragmatism at its best. It allows to create in the land of uncertainty, allows you to give you proper legal certainty. Gerónimo, one last question. It's 14:29 in the UK, and we said that we will finish at 2:30, so 1 minute to go. One issue that you have not brought up in the conversation, and this is an issue that I have come across in my experience in law reform, which is, what's the problem? Is it regulation or is it implementation of the norm? Knowing you, I'm almost betting money that you're going to tell me both. But what's the problem? Is it the norm or is it the implementation of the norm? And if you cannot choose both, you need to pick one of the two. Which one would you choose?
Okay, let me put it. Let me try to make it as controversial as possible towards the end. So, with regard to taxes,
that's what you have been doing since you started.
Yes.
Why you want to?
Okay, with regard to taxes, this issue was resolved in biblical times. It was 10%. Why did we go from 10% to I don't understand how much it is? And I need to sort of freeze the picture to understand how long might I stick to that chapter. So there you have. We have evolved poorly. What's the problem? Regulation is definitely one of the problems, but modern politicians are also part of the problem. Why? Modern politicians are deciding today based on polls. So they are asking people that don't know of many of these technical aspects, what do they want? And they are deciding on very short-term agendas. In a way, reforming and understanding regulation, it's something that it's quite, I would say, technical. You need to professionalize governmental services. You need to bring real professionalism. Since people working together has mostly failed to provide this service at a level of excellence, we need to go to digitalization, because that's the only way to achieve efficiency. So I would say we need good regulation and we need higher level with efficiency with lower level of political interventionism.
So what's the problem, regulation or implementation?
Oh, at this time, both.
Both. I knew that would be your answer, so that's why I anticipate that, saying if you need to choose one.
Well, you start with rules. You begin with rules. Good rules set the grounds for good implementation. That's why I'm good. Simple goes to the simple summarize. Simple summarize that. Simple rules. First step. That's the block one.
Gerónimo, okay. Thank you very, very much.
Whenever guys, you are queuing, remember about simple. And that's the first step.
Guys, remember, there's one takeaway from today. Just keep it simple. That's the main takeaway. Gerónimo, this has been very, very interesting, very insightful. provocative as expected. We are very grateful for you sharing your proposal with us. We are very thankful that you have remembered your alma mater and you wanted to present your latest publication with us. So a big thanks on behalf of Queen Mary of the Institute for Global Law, Economics and Finance. A big thank you, a big personal thank you as a friend and a colleague. And Gerónimo, there's a request that they are eager to read your book in English, and they're wondering when it will be published in English.
Well, I am talking with Penguin at this point. The pandemic has somehow delayed, but I hope to have news about that shortly. So far, everything that I'm doing is being posted in social media, and I hope that the book is translated anytime soon. I'll hope to give you that good news in the forthcoming weeks or months at the most. The book at this point is only in Spanish because I am aiming to reform in these 20 countries. But for sure, I want it translated, and it's selling extremely well in the US, which makes no sense. But that's the case.
You have to have a little bit more faith in yourself. Why does it
No,
make
I know, but it's sort of soaring in the US and in Central America especially. So it's interesting how things are going their own way.
Gerónimo, thank you very much. And also a big thank you on behalf of Queen Mary and the Institute to all participants. It would have been an absolute pleasure to host you here. And please stay tuned as we will be conducting more events. At the moment, we are planning the forthcoming event, which will be on SPACs, Special Purpose Acquisition Companies. So
thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you to Queen Mary, and thank you to everyone that has stayed here. And it has been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.